Jennifer DeBrienza, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
We're gathered here the morning after your marathon meeting last night to review the reopening plans, and you had a Zoom meeting full of concerned, frustrated, some angry parents and teachers. And I'm wondering, what are your reflections on last night's meeting? And during that meeting, you expressed, not sure what the right word would be, but certainly concerned that there was a disconnect between what you're hearing from the public, and especially the teachers, and what your understandings have been about the communication that's gone on. So if you could address those questions and concerns.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot there, but my priority has been for us to get back in person when it was safe to do so. And all along, we have been using the county health department's guidance on that. And I see no reason to waver from that now. I think it's important, since we are not health experts, to turn to our health experts. So we have been talking about this from the get-go. In fact, over the summer, we thought we would open elementary and hybrid, and then that was shut down by the governor. And I did think that our administration made a wise choice when the governor shut us down, I think it was late July, to say, okay, we are just committing to remote at least until October 12th, because this ping pong whiplash is just not helpful for teachers planning, parents planning, anything else. So although I was disappointed we weren't opening in person, that made sense to me. I think it gave a little bit of confidence and clearance to some clarity to all the stakeholders. But we sort of had always said, once we can open again, that's a priority. Last night's comments didn't reflect the email. I mean, they did reflect some of the emails we're getting, but we're getting just as many emails saying, why are you not open yet? The county said, once you're 14 days off the purple list, you can open. So now is it, we're 14 days, we need you to open. So we've been getting massive amounts of communication, very split. So I was a little surprised last night to hear really just all the concerns and not a whole lot of the desire to open up again, because that is out there. And as a school district, I think we have an obligation to serve kids in person if we can. There are many, many kids who aren't being served well now, from our moderate to severe special ed kids to kids that don't have reliable internet access, that don't have reliable supervision, to kids that aren't engaged, right? They're either not logging in or they're not doing the assignments. Many of our youngest kids, kindergarten, first grade, parents and teachers are saying it's really hard to do this over Zoom. We don't really know that we're teaching the kids to read over Zoom. And then there's the isolation and the depression that I think a lot of kids K-12 are starting to really feel. So I don't think that just staying all remote is an option. I think the question becomes, what does it look like? And so we've said from the beginning that we would move to this. You could make a choice in October for whether you wanted to remain hybrid or come back. And that seems to be really upsetting some portion of our community. I do think that my biggest concern last night was what you spoke to, this disconnect. And I think there's probably lots of layers to it. Several of the questions that I heard last night from staff, those answers are in the safety plans, and those safety plans are public. They're on our website, and they were in the board packet. So I don't think it's a question of us not putting it out there, but maybe it requires more right now, given the amount of information that's coming and the amount of stress that people are feeling. So you may have heard last night that when I asked the superintendent, he said, so now we see these safety plans as now site level. So in my mind, the next step, and I was talking to some of our PTA reps this morning and some site council folks, in my mind, the next step is really for like a site council to take up this plan and say, okay, here's what's been proposed. Do we see holes in it? Do we have concerns? Do we have more questions? And then elevating those, sort of coming from okay, our obligation is to open, so how do we make it safe to do that, and how do we make us comfortable doing that, rather than this is just impossible. One of the other differences that I noticed is the thinking between a lot of the teachers said, hey, the plan isn't totally set yet, how can you possibly set a date? versus a lot of our staff saying, we've got a date, it's weeks out. We purposely made it weeks out further from when we could have opened so that we have time to really line up this plan. And both of those seem reasonable to me in different, aspects, but clearly teachers were much less comfortable with that. Yeah, that's why we put it out. We're working out those plans and those details now. So yeah, I think that we have to continue to work on communication. And I think some of our site leadership needs to have ownership of that. I don't know if it was communicated to them that they should, but hopefully now they do, and that will help because I think site by site, they know their classrooms and their space better than we do at the district level for everybody.
So you're, as the only parent of a PAUSD student on the board, you're probably the one that has the most contact with regular parents that are struggling to understand what's going on and to make decisions about their own kids. What are you hearing from those parents, and how does it differ from what your colleagues seem to be gathering about what's happening in the community?
I think it's probably similar right now. I am hearing that whole gamut from the community. There are parents that really are worried about their kids, either mental health or academics or how they're going to manage their job, and they want school to be back in session. I'm hearing from parents that are saying, we're still really nervous and we're going to pick remote, but that's an option. We'll pick remote, and that's okay. I am hearing from other parents who are saying, I was kind of okay with going back, but obviously our teachers need to be bought in and need to be on board for this to be successful. So I have concerns now about that. So I think for that reason, that was helpful last night to really hear not only those teacher concerns, but parents sort of, being supportive of that staff, probably both because they care about the staff and they know the experience will be better if the staff's bought in.
I think a lot of people have this sense that Palo Alto is handling this in a much more chaotic manner than other districts, and especially with regards to the teacher relationship, managing that relationship, and the union has not gone well in this district. Is that just a bad perspective? Is that an incorrect perspective? Or do you have the same sense that we are not doing as well at managing this as other districts comparable to ours? So
having spoken with many people in other districts, parents, teachers, other school board members, I think it feels just as chaotic no matter where you are. I think there's a lot of anxiety everywhere. We do tend to think that we're different, either better or worse or, whatnot. But I am in touch with some staff at Los Altos Elementary and, the elementary district, and they are in the middle of planning to go back, and there's definitely some anxiety, but it's not at the level that I heard last night. Also, Menlo Park, there's plans to go back. So I think there does seem to be a difference in, I don't know if it's communication, if it's trust, but in that relationship a little bit. And yet I Googled it this morning, and all over the state there are sort of union letters to boards and districts saying, we don't want to go back, we don't feel safe, right? That's a common refrain, but it seems like districts have landed in different places though. There is that concern, but we are going back and just being careful. There is that concern, but we're just not going back at all. I think they land in different places, but I think the concern is similar. I think that there are some in the community and some teachers even that maybe aren't aware of what our limitations are with regard to the union, right? There are some great things about collective bargaining and there are some limits of it. And so, last night some teachers said, you haven't even surveyed the teachers yet. Well, that's kind of the union's role to do, right? To survey their teachers and bring it into bargaining. And that's something that I suppose we could do as well, but the union is doing that. So it isn't our role to do that. It's that negotiation is supposed to take place, and they are supposed to speak for their membership. But
then you're relying on the union's representations to their own members, as they're then creating the environment through which they're getting the feedback.
Right.
It seems to me that that's a big difference in terms of how you relate to the teachers from what other districts are doing. I mean, why not why not engage the teachers at each school more directly than through the union?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think you're right. It's when you let another organization do it, another body do it, they are framing it up the way they want to frame it up, right? And that might be less productive for us. Because as I said, a lot of the questions that were asked last night, there are answers out there already, but that's missing somewhere, right? So yeah, I think there is the question of, should there be more engagement? Over the summer, there were grade level meetings talking about these are the different models we could have. Dr. Austin spoke last night. After I asked, he clarified it wasn't a proposal, but there was an idea batted around about whether or not we could live stream elementary so that classes could stay together. And there was tremendous pushback. Majority of teachers I heard from said, that's an awful idea. We don't want to do that. And so it never came forward as an actual proposal. And that was something that came out during these grade level meetings that happened with administration. So they're happening. Whether or not they're happening in all the ways they could be and maybe should be, I think is a question we need to ask, especially now once Dr. Austin said, okay, those safety plans are sort of site-led. Well, now I'm hoping that principals and teachers and site councils are getting together and talking about those plans and making sure everyone understands them, maybe doing walkthroughs on the campus to say, this is what it would look like. How are we feeling? What are our concerns?
Yeah, my fear of that is that you get to the whole site-based decision-making, and on something like this, you don't want a parent at Addison having one experience and a parent at Palo Verde having a different experience that's not satisfactory to them.
Yeah, that's the concern about Nixon, right? That there is this movement on Nixon. We want to keep our community together, which is wonderful. I want my kid to stay with his teacher, and I'd like to do the modality we want to do, right? And so, and at the beginning, in August, we said this was going to be an issue then, but in theory, that's different than it in reality, right? And so, as Nixon, as pretty, I think cohesively, I haven't talked to every one of them, but there's a signed letter saying we want to do it this way. Well, it does actually violate the MOU, so that's a question of whether or not we could do that. But even if we then did, now, well, I want to do that too, and Aloni's not doing that, but Nixon's doing that. Wait a second. I don't know if that serves us well as a unified district to go site by site in making those decisions. But sites do know their campuses best, right? They vary in size and layout. So certainly some feedback on safety and even how updated they are, right? If they have MERV 13 or MERV 8 or, that kind of thing. So I think that's useful information to have.
Do you feel like there are enough resources right now for the teachers in terms of PPE and the things that they need to feel safe? Yeah,
I do, and yet that's from my perspective. I heard those concerns last night, and again, I'd want to make sure, I heard a teacher or two say, we have like 2 weeks worth of supplies, now we're out. Well, I am assuming we have more and can get more because we have been assured by staff that we can, but I don't know if that hasn't been communicated to staff or if it's just with anxiety becomes that uncertainty, right? Like I don't trust that yet. I want to see it, right? So I think, again, us continuing to communicate that and make sure everyone knows that the principals know that, yeah, we've got as much sanitizer, as my kids call it, as you could ever need right here now. And if you run out, we've got more for you. So continuing that feedback loop and making sure that those assurances are there.
You served on the board during a lot of turnover, particularly at the district office and a new superintendent as well. What's your assessment of the state of district leadership and particularly what areas have improved or perhaps declined under Superintendent John Austin?
So this is bigger than COVID. So yeah, there's been a huge turnover in leadership and our organizational structure. There's a lot of things that we do differently now. When I started, we were under one superintendent, and then we had an interim superintendent, and then we had Dr. Austin, who now it's been 2 years. And so I saw those three differences, and kids at play, it's lovely. And there are definitely some distinct changes. Dr. Austin came and pointed out how some of the ways that our district leadership were organized in a way that was different than any district he'd ever seen. And so what we thought of as very normal and whatnot, well, why is this so? I don't know, that's a great question. And when he talked it through with us, I think he really did a significant reorganization of central administration. And I think that not only has that made us, hate to say more nimble, because that sounds really wordy, but I think that it flows better. But also, I think even the departments within the district office are less siloed. I think that Dr. Austin said to me pretty soon after these changes were made, the organizational changes, if you have any question about any initiative that the district is doing, you should be able to ask anybody on core, not just that person that's in charge of it. We all need to know what's going on with our major initiatives. And that struck me as significant and different. And I have found that to be true. I can ask, anyone really in senior leadership, and they can talk to that issue in a way that I think is useful and helps the system. We've also seen 3 different CBOs. And I like now the way that the budget is presented to us, and the way that I think the district is thinking about the budgeting process. Also, my understanding is that HR and the finance department talk to each other and are much more aligned than they used to be, which in hindsight troubles me, and I was not aware of at the very beginning. So I think that there are a lot of sort of efficiencies and coordination that are much better and serve students better. It's mostly new leadership, as you know. I mean, when I started on the board, Sharon Ofek was in the central office, and Lisa Hickey was at a site and is now at central office. And Judy Argametta was here. There's not a whole lot more leadership that was here then. So it's really been a big change. So obviously there's negatives to that, but to have some of that consistency and people that have experience in other districts knowing what has worked well in other places and what's been deemed reasonable in other places, I think has been helpful for us to have perspective.
What areas do you feel like still need work?
I would like us to have a communications person. I know that sometimes you find that that's a barrier for your work, but especially in the past 7 months, just the quantity of information that has had to be disseminated and feedback that's had to be gathered to so many different stakeholders, whether it be the staff, the families, students, the press, the community at large, the county. There's just been so much information, and I think that there are often times where I'm talking to senior staff and they've just spent all day working on the communication rather than doing the work that needs to happen. I don't think that serves us well. So I do think the kind of information officer we have matters, but I think it's really important. They're just, sometimes our staff that's not their skill set, is really the communication. So they might have a great idea and not communicate it well, or the survey might be trying to get at the right stuff, but it's not asked in a way that really gets us the information we need. So I think that would be a useful addition. And I think people have different communication styles, and some people really prefer some over others, and that's been a struggle for us during this time when people have been sensitive and anxious and fearful. That sometimes leading with confidence really instills confidence, and sometimes it feels dismissive, and that's, I think, been a struggle.
Superintendent Austin has written a lot of words about the situation we're in, and there's a lot of stuff posted on the website. Have you ever been to, have you recently been to the PAUSD website?
Yes.
And have you tried to find any information on schools reopening or the COVID crisis?
Well, when I went, which I feel like was 2 days ago, there was a COVID thing that popped up, and I clicked to COVID to go to all that. I do think that I went looking for the safety plans because I said, why do people not know what these are? They're in the board packet. And I found them in an appendix section, so that wasn't completely transparent. I think that managing all that information on a website, it's constantly being updated and changed. So I think we probably could continue to do better. That might be.
Well, we've had about 4 versions of a website now in the last 4 years, I think.
Yeah, and one of it had to be a major overhaul to meet with ADA requirements,
right,
which then, put up other challenges for us. But I think that those, you meet the ADA requirements and then you keep improving as you go. But yeah, there have been a lot of changes. So even people that go to the website often, which I think to your point, maybe don't know where to find stuff now. And I heard that I'm on the Pally parent Facebook page because I'm a Pally parent. And there was the Pally page has been updated again, which all the school site websites were updated to align with the district one for those same reasons. But that made it harder to navigate, or at least newer to navigate, and people found it wasn't as transparent. So I think that's going to be some continuous improvement as well.
Yeah. One of the things that you've emphasized is, as a need in this district right now, is what you're calling an equity audit. I'm wondering how that differs from the work that's already been done in this area and what you hope to get out of that.
Oh, big difference. Honestly, I see the work that we've done, not explicitly, I don't think anyone would say it, but as though the problem is the students themselves. We focus on more tutors, we focus on more hours, we focus on their test scores, we focus on how we can support the families. And I think while some of our students really do need extra help and we should provide it, I think the problem is the district. We have been talking about this for way before I was on the scene, right? And we've barely moved the needle despite much effort, tremendous effort and initiatives and work. So if year after year, your system gets the same outcome, it seems the system is set up to get that outcome. It's perfectly poised to continue getting that outcome. So I just think we need to change the system and not focus on what do we have to do to change the kids or help the kids. I think it's a failure of our district to do its fundamental job, which is to serve all children. So it has been asked when I've asked for this, what exactly do you want us to do? And as a privileged white woman, I don't know that I am perfectly positioned to answer that. I think we need to get some help in doing that. So whether that's internal staff or hiring someone from the outside to come in and help guide us through it. As I was trying to find the words to what this is, whether it's an audit or whether it's just an examination of our practices and our policies and our culture, the podcast Nice White Parents came out, and I don't know if any of you have listened to that, but it was supposed to be a 4-part series, and in the 5th part, they added a 5th episode because there was just more to talk about. And this middle school in Brooklyn, which I have been to, and it's been focused on, it was the focus of the whole thing, was talking about now the work they do and bringing in these outside people that have helped them really look at their culture, look at their practices that maybe are alienating certain groups or making groups not feel a part of it, of the culture, assumptions, stereotypes that we have, on hidden biases that we have. There's a lot of work to do there, I think.
And that work hasn't been done in the last few years as part of all of the reorganization and additional staffing and the...
There has been some work done. There has been, one of the ones that keeps coming up, and it's a small example, but I think it's a tangible one, is that at some of our middle schools, if you had an outstanding library fine, you couldn't attend the school dance or overnight field trip. Well, you can imagine who has those outstanding fines and who then gets further left out of feeling a part of the community. It's a small one, but it's an example. So I think there are things like that sort of all over our district that exist, and that a district that is largely led by white administrators maybe don't see. There have been lots of conversations with stakeholders where I think what has been explicitly stated is, we feel othered, we feel outside of the community, we feel like you're doing us a favor by letting us be here, we feel not a part of it. But I don't think those conversations have necessarily said, can you point to specific instances or can you point to specific examples? And I don't know that it should be on that group of people to point to. They can be helpful to us if they want to be, but I wouldn't lay it on them. So I think that we need to do that work. And I think a lot of the work during the reorg has been focused on equity. I would never fault anyone on the board and anyone in the administration for not caring about equity and wanting to close this achievement gap. But I think we're clearly focused on the wrong thing because we're not moving the needle.
There's been a lot of attention paid to Cubberley with some action this year, the master planning. And then the city decided to shrink its lease. I wanted to know what your opinion is of the Cubberley situation overall.
Last year, for several years, we went through that beautiful process with Concordia, lots of public input, and a plan, a vision that I could only describe as like, if I were a first-time home buyer and I saw that, I was like, oh, that's what I want. And of course it was expensive, estimated $1 billion bill to it. Obviously the district is, maybe not obviously to everybody, the district is limited on the action that they can take in investing in it right now with bond funds, because we don't have the need for that as a school site right now. At the same time, it is, obviously it's our biggest parcel as a community good, and there is a lot of desire to update it, if not totally rebuild it. And so many of our community and so many of our current students and former students use it for so many different reasons. So I am interested in continuing that conversation. Last year, there was clearly a board majority that wanted to put that on hold because we had other things in front of us. I wasn't of that mindset, but it was a board majority. So I actually don't fault the city in reducing the lease. They had a huge budget deficit to make up, and there was no reason why they had to, why they had to keep supporting a lease that they didn't think that they were going to be using. That's our problem. It was unfortunate we had to cut more, but I would like to continue that conversation and find out what the possibilities are, right? Whether it's a ground lease, where we still make sure we have the opportunity to use it as a school if and when need be, that anything gets built can be used for a school. I know there's constant talk about housing on that site, and obviously if it was ever used as a school site, we could not have housing on the school campus, or we can't control who can come in and out of that campus. So I think there's lots of things to discuss about it, but I'm interested in continuing those discussions.
The city has recently talked about, or people, when they're thinking about the city's 8 acres, talking about just separating it, going ahead, let's just do something with that. It sounds like your idea would be to continue the partnership.
I think continuing the partnership's important. We have very few large parcels in town. Starting to divide them up does not sound like a good idea to me. So I think we can take it, at least have the conversations and see if we can make something work before deciding, all right, let's just be neighbors.
Could you ever see the district selling some of that land to the city?
Yeah, I could see that as a possibility. I mean, not enough that we couldn't have a school if we needed to. But yeah, I think at this point, anything's on the table to find out how to continue to let the community take full advantage of that great site while not limiting our future use. I wouldn't want to sell it to a developer, but maybe to the city if they had a commitment for how they'd use it and a possibility of future trade back later or us leasing it from them.
I think you're well aware that there's been this growing difference in parent opinion around, you talk a lot about the achievement gap and equity, and that there's a group of parents who fear that that's going to dilute the quality of education in Palo Alto, and they worry about academic rigor and what that means for their children. How do you reconcile those differences in parent opinions about sort of what the district is doing and how it's serving its students?
Yeah, I think it's an important and significant question because there are these different beliefs, and I think part of it has to do with what is our role as trustees, and is it to reflect the wishes of the community and a majority or a minority, or is it to reflect what we believe is best for students and who gets to decide that? It's a complex issue, obviously. I think that our systemic issues and not adequately serving a subset of our students only amplifies this problem, because the belief that in order to serve all kids, you need to bring the level of academics down, I think is a misnomer. I think it's not accurate. I think that all of the kids in our district are capable of achieving at high levels and I think usually this has to do with math, right? Let's call it out here. It's usually math. I don't hear a lot of people saying, oh my gosh, you're holding my kid back in literacy. Maybe some are. But I think it has to do with math. And I think that all of our students can certainly achieve the levels of math that we're hearing some parents say they want their kids to be able to get to. The question becomes, what is our responsibility in letting kids race ahead, continue to achieve at higher levels at different points in their schooling? And I've heard the district talk about, one, the A to G requirements, which once you get into math are really Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and geometry, are something that they feel they want us to provide those 3 classes in district. And then after that, sure, have at it. You can go ahead and take outside classes. And 2, there is an attention to middle school being a big change for kids in the model of the schooling they're getting, and it being, pivotal years in early teenager and preteen, and that being with same age cohorts is a priority, and making sure you're with same age kids. So given there are lots of different priorities and different reasons for different reasons in different ways, I think that it makes some parents feel frustrated that we don't always let their kids just go ahead. I do think as a school district, we have several responsibilities, and our first one is there are state standards, and our first job is to get everyone there. We successfully get some there, some get there on their own, and we aren't getting everyone there. And being the school district that we are with lots of resources, I think we have to provide lots of options beyond that. But making sure that we get every kid as high as they can get every moment, I do not think is our main responsibility as a district.
We're running out of time, so I want to ask one last question.
Sure.
The district has invested a lot of resources and time in two important areas. One, mental health needs of our kids, and the second is the general issue of Title IX and sexual harassment and the OCR compliance and so forth. How would you, in looking at where we are now, assess those two areas, and what further work is needed in both?
Yeah, I think we, as you said, we've done extensive work when it comes to mental health. We have wellness centers that are extensively used by students. We have students taking advantage of what we offer. It's hard to compare it right now because I think there is elevated distress given all the circumstances that are going on. But during this remote time, we have instituted sort of bought into Care Solace, which I'm told that many students are taking advantage of, which I am grateful for, that there is a way to keep that going for continuity and to help kids that are newly in distress. I do think kids are using the resources, which is great. I do think the work that we still need to do is to find ways to have fewer kids need such extensive resources. I think that we continue to have some culture and climate that I know high schoolers that think that you have to get all A's, even if it's not coming from their parents. I talk to parents who say, I am not giving that message, but the message is clear. And I'm sure that not every kid on our high school campuses feel that way, but a lot of them do, even if their parents are saying it's not the truth. So there's tons of pressure they are putting on themselves. So they are then needing these services because they are extra stressed out. And so I think we still have to work on culture and climate. I think that the resources are there for kids that need them, but I think there are ways to reduce the need. And Title IX, I think we now have a pretty robust system where we have, I am pleased with how we are taking seriously and investigating reports that come to us. Again, I still think we have to do some culture and climate work that, it's a hard culture to push up against. And I think we are doing the work, but there's a lot more work to do.
Great. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much for being with us, Jennifer
Thank you.
DeBrienza.